The first flakes fell like a warning, silent, harmless, and apparently grounds for war according to our HOA's reigning tyrant, Keran. I was halfway through shoveling my driveway when her voice sliced through the cold. Morning air, sharp enough to chip ice. She marched toward me in her neon-pink snow boots, clutching her clipboard like it was a sacred tablet. "This snowfall is unauthorized," she declared, as though I had orchestrated a cosmic weather conspiracy. I blinked at her, trying to decide if she was serious. She was. She always was. She leaned in, lowering her voice like we were discussing state secrets. Section 4B of the HOA guidelines clearly states that all weather-related disturbances must be reported and pre-approved when possible. I tried not to laugh. "You want me to report snow?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. "Yes. The accumulation level is disruptive to community aesthetics." I gestured to the entire neighborhood buried in white. "Keran, it snowed on everyone." She glared at me, as though nature itself had chosen me as its accomplice. "I will be issuing a violation," she announced, scribbling furiously on her clipboard. I watched dumbfounded as she marched off. A few neighbors peeked through their blinds, silently offering sympathy. I shrugged and went back to shoveling, but the irritation simmered. This wasn't the first time. Keran had accused me of violating some obscure HOA expectation, but accusing me of causing snow was a new level of absurd. By the time the driveway was clear, I had decided I needed reinforcements. The person I called was the one Keran feared most, someone who didn't tolerate nonsense, bureaucracy, or self-appointed neighborhood dictators. My dad. A retired military officer, Dad wasn't loud or intimidating. He just had a way of staring at. Someone that made them reconsider every decision they'd ever made. When I called and explained the situation, he took a long pause. "Unauthorized snowfall?" he repeated. "Son, what on earth kind of HOA are you living under?" "The kind that files paperwork against clouds," I answered. Dad sighed. "I'll be there in the morning." I could only shake my head, not realizing this ridiculous moment would spark chaos none of us expected. It was only the beginning of a long, bizarre week. The next morning, my dad's old pickup rumbled into the neighborhood like a tank entering enemy territory. He stepped out wearing his faded army jacket, the one that practically announced, "I've dealt with worse than this." He looked around, taking in the perfectly trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, and of course, the woman herself, Keran, already standing on her porch with her clipboard, eyes locked on him like a hawk spotting a threat. I met him halfway down the driveway. "Morning, Dad," I said. He looked at the snow, then at me. "Still unauthorized?" he asked dryly. I couldn't help but laugh. Apparently. Before we could exchange another word, Keran stormed over, her boots crunching through the snow like she was marching into battle. "Excuse me," she barked. "Who are you? And why are you parking that vehicle in violation of our HOA parking ordinance?" Dad's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Ma'am, I'm visiting my son," he said calmly. "Well, visiting or not, guests are required to pre-register their vehicles. You're also not permitted to have industrial equipment in residential areas." She pointed dramatically at his pickup. Dad folded his arms, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Industrial equipment? That's a Ford, ma'am." Keran flipped through her clipboard like she was searching for a specific clause in the Constitution. Rule 17. All vehicles larger than a standard sedan must be reported. That truck is offensive to the uniformity of the neighborhood aesthetic. Dad stared at her for a long, silent moment. Then, in his calm, commanding tone, he said, "Ma'am, I've led convoys through snowstorms twice this size, and not once did the weather ask for permission. So unless you've got a way to regulate the atmosphere, I think we can let this snowfall slide." For a second, Keran froze, clearly not used to being challenged. Her mouth opened and closed like a goldfish. "I will be escalating this," she sputtered finally, and stormed off toward her house. Dad turned to me, suppressing a grin. "She always like that?" "Worse," I said. "You just saw her on a good day." We went inside, but the war wasn't over. A few hours later, I got an email from the HOA board, a formal violation notice citing unreported meteorological disturbances and guest non-compliance. Dad read it and chuckled. Guess we're making an impression. He stood up, cracking his knuckles. Time for a meeting. The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a beige, windowless room that looked like it had been decorated by someone who hated joy. Dad and I arrived a few minutes early, but Keran was already there, sitting at the center of the long conference table like an emperor awaiting tribute. Her clipboard rested in front of her, flanked by 2 steaming cups of herbal tea labeled calming blend, though nothing about her ever seemed calm. The rest of the board members filtered in, each giving Dad a cautious glance. Word had apparently spread that an outsider, a truck-driving outsider, was challenging the sanctity of their regulations. Keran cleared her throat. We are here to address a severe violation committed by him. She pointed at me with the stiff enthusiasm of a traffic cone. Dad raised an eyebrow. Let's hear it. Keran slid a stack of printed photos across the table. They were pictures of my driveway kevered in snow. Exhibit A, she announced. Unapproved precipitation accumulation. One of the board members looked confused. Keran, we all got snow. Yes, she snapped, but he didn't notify us beforehand so we could issue a winter event compliance advisory. Dad leaned forward. And how exactly was he supposed to notify you? Should he have emailed the clouds? A few board members hid smiles. Keran bristled. Snowfall can be predicted. He should have filed a precipitation alert. Dad took a deep breath, steepling his fingers like he was negotiating with an unruly recruit. Ma'am, weather is not something anyone here controls. Not me, not my son, not even your HOA. Keran's eyes narrowed. That attitude is precisely why we have rules. Without structure, the neighborhood becomes chaotic. Dad tapped the table. There's enforcing rules and then there's inventing nonsense. He lifted one of the photos. And this is nonsense. The room murmured in agreement. Even the board members who usually nodded along with Keran's every decree seemed uncomfortable. Keran tried to regain control. Additionally, his guest, she shot a glare at Dad, failed to register his oversized industrial vehicle. Dad chuckled. It's a pickup truck, standard size, parked in a designated spot. You want to measure it? I'll bring a tape. One board member sighed. Keran, maybe we're going too far. Her face reddened. We cannot allow leniency. Today it's snow. Tomorrow it's livestock. I stiffened. Livestock? She had no idea what she just set in motion, because Keran's daughter had already stumbled into that exact territory thanks to my cows. And that's when the story took a hilariously muddy turn. Keran's outburst about livestock might have sounded ridiculous to everyone else in that stale HOA meeting room, but to me, it struck a very specific nerve because just a few days earlier, her teenage daughter had trespassed onto my small hobby farm at the edge of the neighborhood. She'd slipped past the fence, wandering into my pasture with a phone held high like she was on safari. My cows, being friendly, lumbered toward her. Instead of running, she squealed with excitement and began snapping selfies like she'd discovered celebrity wildlife. I spotted her from the barn window, and for a split second, I considered marching out and lecturing her. But then, a better idea struck. A gloriously petty, perfectly timed idea. Sitting right next to me was the manure loader, my trusty front-end attachment. The cows were already looking picturesque in the winter light. But what her Instagram needed was a photobomb. So I hopped into the loader, eased it toward the fence, lifted the bucket just high enough, and leaned into frame behind her. Right at the moment she took her next selfie. There I was, looming dramatically, perched above a mountain of cow manure like the world's most unbothered guardian of the farm. She didn't hear the engine over her own laughter. But when she checked her phone a moment later, she let out a scream so sharp even the cows flinched. She looked up, saw me sitting there like the world's weirdest backdrop, and bolted for the gate. I waved politely as she scrambled out. Later that night, Keran sent a furious email demanding I cease intimidating minors with heavy machinery. I replied with the security footage. showing her daughter trespassing. That shut her down real quick, or so I thought. Back in the HOA meeting, Dad listened as I retold the story. The board members stared wide-eyed. When I got to the part about the selfie photobomb, one of them snorted. Another openly laughed. Even the board treasurer, the one who always sided with rules over reason, wiped a tear from his eye. Keran, meanwhile, looked like she was about to combust. "That is completely irrelevant," she shrieked. Dad shook his head. "No, ma'am. It shows a pattern. You enforce rules on others but ignore them when it concerns your own family." Silence fell. For once, Keran had no comeback. Within minutes, the board voted to dismiss all my violations, including the absurd unauthorized snowfall. They even asked Keran to step back from enforcement duties for a while. Dad and I walked out victorious. Snow still fell, cows still mooed, and somewhere, Keran's daughter was probably still deleting manure loader selfies. Would you like a title card, thumbnail text, or description to go with your video? Enjoying this wild ride through HOA chaos, unauthorized snowfall, and manure loader photobombs? Go ahead and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next absurd adventure. If this saga made you laugh or reminded you of your own neighborhood drama, drop a like and tell me in the comments. What's the most ridiculous rule you've ever had to deal with?